Facts don't care about your feelings.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. I bet you're the kind of person who loves to really dig deep into ideas.
Absolutely, that's what we're all about.
And today, we're going to be tackling a topic that feels especially relevant right now, with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's this whole facts versus feelings debate.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
We're constantly bombarded with information and opinions these days. So how do we even begin to sort through it all? How do we stay grounded in facts without becoming, robots?
Right, like where's the balance?
Exactly. So, to guide our deep dive today, we've got two sources. First up, we've got that infamous Ben Shapiro quote. Facts don't care about your feelings.
Always a good one to get people talking.
It's definitely provocative. And then we'll be looking at a blog post called Stick to the Facts, Not the Feelings, which promises some practical advice on exactly that.
Sounds hopeful.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. But let's start with that Shapiro quote. When you hear facts don't care about your feelings, what's your initial reaction?
It's definitely a statement that grabs your attention right away. I think ultimately it's trying to highlight that the truth, in the form of facts, exists whether we like it or not.
Right. It's objective. Like gravity doesn't care if you're terrified of heights.
Exactly.
But I have to say, there's a part of me that feels a little uneasy with that level of detachment.
Yeah, I get that.
Doesn't completely ignoring feelings seem a bit harsh? Especially in personal relationships.
You're right. The quote, while it emphasizes objectivity, might be a bit oversimplified. Completely shutting down feelings, I think, can be counterproductive. How can we connect with others, understand different perspectives, or even lead effectively if we disregard emotions entirely?
That's a great point. So maybe it's less about ignoring feelings and more about finding the right balance.
Exactly. And I think that's where the blog post comes in. The author starts with a personal story, about how letting emotions rule his actions as a kid led to some, pretty embarrassing moments.
It makes his advice really relatable.
Yeah.
It did feel very human. And then he lays out these 4 strategies for staying grounded in facts. He calls them asking questions, listening, giving direction, and following up.
I like how these strategies aren't about denying emotions, but rather creating space between our immediate emotional response and our actions, taking a breath.
Okay, let's break those down. Asking questions seems pretty straightforward.
It is, but we often forget to do it, especially when emotions are running high. The blog gives an example of a leader who learned to ask clarifying questions before reacting to an employee's emotional outburst. It helped him avoid jumping to conclusions and gave him a more complete picture of the situation.
I can see how that would be useful, not just in work situations, but also with friends and family. Sometimes just taking a moment to say, wait, help me understand why you're feeling this way, can really de-escalate things.
Absolutely. It shifts the focus from reacting to seeking understanding, which is huge.
Okay, next up. Listening. We all think we're good listeners, right?
Sure.
But this blog post makes me wonder if there's more to it.
Definitely. Active listening, the kind that helps us stay rooted in facts. It's a skill. It requires practice. It means setting aside our own biases and truly hearing what the other person is saying, even when it's difficult.
It's hard. The post really stressed not interrupting, letting the other person fully express themselves before jumping in with our own thoughts.
Yes, that can be tough, especially when we're dealing with these, really charged topics. But by making a conscious effort to listen attentively, we gather more information, we grasp the context, and we avoid those knee-jerk emotional reactions that can cloud our judgment.
So we've asked questions, we've listened, now it's time for giving direction.
Exactly. The author frames this step as finding the balance between empathy and decisiveness. So you've heard the other person, you've considered their perspective, but as a leader, sometimes you need to provide clear guidance based on the facts at hand.
He even provides a helpful phrase. I hear what you're saying, but this is what I need you to do.
Oh, I like that.
Acknowledges the feelings while still setting expectations.
It's a great example of navigating those tricky situations where facts and feelings might be pulling in different directions. You're being respectful while also being assertive.
All right, the final step is following up. Why is this so important in this framework?
Well, I think it shows genuine care and commitment. It's going beyond just making a decision and moving on. It's about demonstrating that you're invested in seeing things through.
And it's a chance to course correct, right? If something isn't working, following up allows for adjustments based on new information or feedback.
Exactly. It builds in accountability, both for ourselves and for others.
It's funny how we talk about being objective.
Right?
Like it's some easy switch we can flip.
Like we can just become pure logic machines.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
But the reality is our brains are wired for both logic and emotions.
They're intertwined, really, constantly influencing each other. It shapes how we see the world and make decisions.
So how do we even begin to untangle those influences? How do we become more aware of when our feelings might be leading us astray?
One key is recognizing that emotions don't always show up in big, dramatic ways.
Oh, interesting.
Sometimes it's those subtle things,
Like what?
the nagging doubts, the gut feelings that something's just not right, even if we can't quite explain why.
So we need to pay attention to those quieter signals, those intuitive nudges, and try to figure out what they're telling us.
Exactly. It requires a willingness to turn inward, to examine our own emotional landscape. Ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? What assumptions am I making? Is this based on solid evidence, or am I letting fear or maybe wishful thinking cloud my judgment?
That self-awareness can be tough to cultivate, though. It's one thing to recognize those patterns, but then what? How do we actually challenge them?
It's an ongoing process for sure, but the more we practice that self-awareness, the better we become at navigating this whole complex interplay between facts and feelings. And this brings us to another important piece of the puzzle: empathy.
So it's not just about managing our own emotions, but also trying to understand where other people's feelings are coming from.
Precisely. Empathy is that ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It's crucial for communication, for building trust, and for resolving conflicts in a healthy way.
But how do we practice empathy when someone's feelings seem totally out of sync with the facts as we see them?
That's where active listening comes back into play. Remember those strategies we talked about? Asking questions, really hearing the other person's perspective without interruption. These are all tools for building empathy, even when we disagree.
So instead of dismissing someone's feelings as irrational, we try to understand the deeper needs, experiences, or fears that might be shaping their perspective.
Yes. And often when we take the time to truly listen, we discover that even those seemingly irrational feelings are rooted in something real, something that makes sense within that person's world.
That makes sense. But what about situations where someone's feelings are leading them to make choices that seem harmful or destructive? How do we balance empathy with the need to set boundaries or intervene?
That's a tough one. There's no easy answer. I think it comes back to finding that balance we've been discussing, acknowledging the validity of someone's feelings while also staying true to our own values and principles.
So we can say something like, I understand why you're feeling this way, and I care about you, but I can't support this behavior because it goes against what I believe.
Exactly. And that's where clear communication is so important. We need to be able to articulate our own perspectives and boundaries in a way that is both firm and respectful.
It seems like navigating this whole facts versus feelings landscape requires a lot of nuance, a lot of paying attention to context and individual circumstances.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. But by building our self-awareness, cultivating empathy, and practicing those skills like asking questions, listening, giving direction, and following up, we can become more skillful at navigating these, sometimes tricky waters.
What's really sticking with me is this idea that it's not about choosing sides, facts, or feelings. It's about recognizing that both are important. Both play a role in how we understand the world and relate to each other.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot, that dynamic balance where we can honor both logic, A and D, emotion, head and D, heart.
So how do we actually put all of this into practice in our daily lives? That's what I'm really curious about. So we've talked about all these important pieces, the self-awareness, the empathy, the active listening.
Right, right.
But how do we actually put this into practice in our daily lives? What are some things, some tangible things we can do to really find that balance?
Well, one surprisingly powerful practice is cultivating curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, instead of instantly reacting to something with a strong emotion, try approaching it with a curious mindset.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, ask yourself, what's really going on here? What's the other person's perspective? Am I missing something?
It's almost like becoming an investigator in our own lives, looking for clues instead of jumping to conclusions.
That's a great way to put it. And this curiosity, it extends to our own internal world as well. When you notice yourself having a strong emotional reaction, take a moment to ask, what's triggering this in me? Is it based on solid evidence? Or am I letting, past experiences or biases color my perception?
So it's about being more mindful, both internally and externally, paying attention to our own emotions and being more attuned to the perspectives of others.
Exactly. That mindfulness helps create a space, between a stimulus and our reaction,
Gives us more control.
which gives us more control over how we respond, exactly.
It's like hitting that pause button before we say or do something we might regret.
Precisely.
Wow.
And in that pause, we can ask ourselves, what's the most helpful way to respond? How can I express my own needs and feelings, but also be respectful of the other person's perspective?
And sometimes that might mean walking away for a bit, right?
For sure.
Giving ourselves time to cool down before things escalate.
Absolutely. It's not about suppressing emotions, but choosing the right time and place to express them effectively.
So being more intentional, choosing our words carefully, considering their impact.
Yes, and this intentionality, it can extend to the information we consume as well.
That's a good point.
We are bombarded with news, with opinions, with social media. It's all designed to grab our attention, trigger those emotional responses.
And it's so easy to get swept up in the outrage of the moment, to feel like we need to have an opinion on everything, even if we haven't really taken the time to understand the issue.
It happens to all of us. So another practical step is being more discerning about our sources, fact-checking information before we share it, being willing to engage in respectful dialogue with people who hold different views.
Honing those critical thinking skills, not just accepting everything at face value.
Right. And being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is. But, there might be other perspectives we haven't considered.
That open-mindedness, that willingness to learn and grow, that's so important in navigating our complex world.
I think it's what allows us to stay grounded in facts while also recognizing the influence of feelings.
So in the end, it's not about facts versus feelings.
Nope.
It's about facts and feelings working together, informing each other,
Helping us make sense of the world, yeah.
helping us make sense of the world and our place in it.
Beautifully said. It's about finding that sweet spot where logic and emotion, head and heart can coexist and even enhance each other.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Definitely.
But with awareness, empathy, and a healthy dose of curiosity, we can all get better at navigating this complex and often messy terrain.
And you know what? Along the way, we might just discover some surprising truths about ourselves and the world around us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope it's given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to do a little investigating of your own.
Your own emotional landscape.
Exactly. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those minds and hearts open.